So I'm Steve Keane, as most of you know, and this is Seamus.
Seamus Malloy.
Okay, and Seamus is one of the members of my online course, the school course. You're probably the youngest member, I'd say.
Yeah.
25?
Yep.
Okay, most of them are about like my age, 2 or 3 times your age.
Yeah.
And it happens to be you're a New Zealander.
Yep.
Okay, and you're over here on a holiday, seeing family in Ireland.
Yep.
And you winged over here to say hi, which I'm very appreciative of.
Oh, I was thinking the same thing. I couldn't believe when you said, "Yeah, we'll meet up and have a chat."
Well, I mean,
wow.
to me, that class, like financially, it's been important for me to be able to, because the funding from crowdfunding is really quite fragile.
Right.
So it's now a source of income for me, which is extremely important. But it's also a way to develop my ideas and present them in a coherent fashion to an intelligent bunch of people. And I'm really, I'm delighted by the people who've actually joined the group for the quality of conversations that goes on there. So, so that was when you said you're going to drop in and say hi in Amsterdam, why not?
Yeah, I love it. I think it's such an awesome opportunity. And it crossed my mind, and sometimes you have those thoughts and you think, it might not work out. The fact that you were just willing and it lined up with the schedules and you came back from Texas, I just thought, well, it must be a reason for it, Like I definitely believe in those sorts of things that line up like that. It's awesome. So very stoked to have the opportunity to be here. It goes both ways.
Yep.
Now, in terms of what we were just talking about before we started, I'd really like to start there with the whole idea of UBI and where your thoughts are on that, because it intrigues me a lot, and it has a lot to do with what my podcast concept is. It's called the conversation concept, and I'll lead into that a little bit more shortly. But I don't have a very good understanding of UBI. I'm very new, and I know that there's different schools of thought, and so maybe you'd be able to speak to that a little bit.
Well, the funny thing is, when you look at conventional economic theory, it effectively assumes that if a worker doesn't work for a wage, they can do subsistence labour themselves on their own devices. So the idea is a worker is supposed to face a labour-leisure trade-off. If you do labour, you get paid. Okay, so the higher you get paid, that's an encouragement to work more and have less leisure. But the concept is always in the back of the logic that you have an alternative. Okay? You can do something else apart from doing a wage. So you're not, if you look at one of my favourite disastrously bad papers in economics is by a guy called Edward Prescott, and he was one of the people who developed the modern neoclassical approach to modelling the business cycle, which I think is completely lunatic. And they basically argue that the economy is always in equilibrium, okay, including during the Great Depression. So the fact that there was a fall in employment in the Great Depression, Edward Prescott in a paper called something on the Great Depression, I've forgotten the actual title, but some observations on the Great Depression. Well, his observation was that there was a decline in what he called labour hours or working hours. And he said it must be in response to some change in labour laws, that workers decided to work less time during the Great Depression, as if that was a voluntary decision to stop working. It's frankly insulting to anybody who experienced the Great Depression, but that's the way they think about it. Well, in that sense, UBI, and not the concept that I heard explained recently on my Steve Keane and Friends podcast by an advocate of UBI. My vision of UBI is to be a bit like that neoclassical concept, that if you're not being paid enough to justify working, you've got something as an alternative, you can still survive. So I'd rather say what I think in terms of is not a universal basic income, but a guaranteed basic income. In other words, if you don't have the ideal in terms of people's vision of a capitalist society is you're either an employer, okay, so you've got a business, you employ people, or you're a worker and you therefore work for a business, and you get a wage, which is, you would hope, a living wage. Okay. Now, if you lose your job or you decide to leave your job voluntarily, then the modern monetary theory argument is you get a job guarantee. And so we work in a state-designed system, whether that's local government or state or national government, and there are various tasks which you can be assigned to, and you then do that work. Now, I can see the benefits of that to some extent, but I also see scale issues and administration issues and all sorts of complications there. And you may well, often they'll say, look, there's all this work we need to do to take care of ill people, or we need to do work to maintain the environment, etc., etc. Now that may work for somebody who doesn't have a creative bent. Tell me what to do and I'll do it type work.
Yeah.
But there will also be people who think, I actually want this time to develop my own ideas, develop my own business or creative side as well. And that's what I see a guaranteed basic income enabling. So you'd be paid enough money to be able to pay your bills and stay alive, but you'd be paid more money if you did the job guarantee, and more money still if you got a private sector job instead. Okay. So there'd be a hierarchy of things. But I see a lot of modern monetary people just go in there and attack the whole idea of a universal basic income. And I got an inkling as to why when I had this particular guy on my Steve Keen and Friends podcast, because he was saying universal, everybody gets it.
Right.
You and I get paid it, so does Rupert Murdoch. Mm-hmm. Now, in that case, the amount you give 100% of people a wage which is a payment which is sufficient to pay all their costs, to me doesn't compute.
Right.
At some point, you're either going to be, if everybody gets it, then what you get as an individual can't be sufficient to survive.
Right.
When I think to make it work, it's got to be something the person who receives it gets sufficient money to be able to survive. Okay? And there have been times in my life when I deliberately did not look for a job because I was trying to create another venture. So I see the guaranteed income suiting that sort of person rather than somebody who just wants a job to earn an income to stay alive and do the things we want to do as a human being in an advanced society. So I see them as being tiered.
Yeah.
But I see a lot of people, their modern monetary theory is just totally anti-UBI. And when I saw this guy, the Canadian, I've forgotten his name now, arguing for what he saw as UBI, I thought, that just doesn't sound practical. Right. I can understand the resistance MMT people have to it. So my idea is more of a guaranteed income.
Yeah.
If you don't have a job, whether you voluntarily leave it or you get sacked during a downturn, and you don't want to do the job guarantee, then there's this third option, which is lower amount of pay, but sufficient to be able to stay alive. And in that situation, the maximum you could imagine giving it to in a society at any one particular point in time would be something like the average unemployment rate, which might be, say, 5% of the population. Yeah. So 1 in 20 gets it, and then in that sense, and that would be an absolute disastrous situation if it was that high. You're more like 1% of the population getting it, then that's you're not going to be driving up overall price level with that level, but you do let people who don't want to be told what to do in a particular job chosen for them as part of a job guarantee scheme. If you want to start a rap band, for example, then you could do it. So that's my concept of it.
Right. I think that I agree in terms of trying to do a blanket anything in this day and age. It's just not going to work. You can't just say everybody gets this and that's going to work for everybody. People are too diverse. The system's too diverse. You can't just say this is how it's going to work for everyone and that's the end of that. Because just as countries and their own systems are diverse sort of people.
Turn your camera a bit. Pardon me. Okay.
So I understand the resistance there for people with UBI as well, if it's that oversimplified. However, then in terms of making it staggered or making it available to people that want to be in that gap between working and trying to create their own venture, it's very similar to a welfare system, but I think that there's 2 points there which are kind of the natural questions that come up, which is firstly, well, is the wage that people are earning, if they're not on the UBI or GBI as you put it, is it going to be fair on those people that are choosing to work? I mean, are they really getting their worthwhile out of working if somebody that isn't working is getting paid the same amount? Well, in how you explained it, yes, because the minimum amount that people will be given through the UBI or the GBI is going to be just enough to get by, but not so much that it outweighs the benefits of actually getting a job. And so you have to look at, well, where is that actually possible? What places is that possible?
Yeah.
Not everywhere has the infrastructures in place and that to support those people. And then as well, you have the aspect of, I suppose that's going back to that first part of the black and white statement is, if you're going to be giving everybody the same amount of money, then where is it coming from and how is it?
Well, you've got to create it. I mean, that's the modern monetary theory argument. The government creates money when it spends; it doesn't borrow.
Right.
But I think if you're doing it and if you're creating enough for everybody at that level, then you're talking, like if you wanted to have a universal basic income which gave enough money for the individual recipients to survive while being paid to everybody in a country. I'm going to take America as an example. You're going to have like 250 million income recipients all getting the amount of money that's sufficient to survive in America. And if you look at the amount that you need to pay for rent, like you might say like a terribly low level would be like $1,000 a month.
Right.
Well, that's $1,000 a month times 250 million. You're talking 250 billion, even just to cover rent. Then you've got to have accommodation, you have food, transportation. You're talking in trillions of dollars. You're getting up to the scale of the government deficit at the moment. So like I see that as unworkable.
Right. And I mean, the thing too is where are the lines of necessity? What comes under basics, and that could be a good segue into the conversation concept, which is what I guess my own personal theory is, coming from a place of a learner, not from someone who knows. It's definitely not an answer. It's just a question that I've had myself, which is more based around the idea of, well, is there a downside to giving people that are in a lower income bracket or in a position where they haven't been able to create their own form of foundation for themselves through, whether it be because they don't have the work ethic, or whether it be because they just have creative ventures which don't have as much income coming in. Is it a good idea to give those people money? Is it a good idea, and what do you think in terms of the risk of, because I know that you speak a lot about private debt and how important that is in the macroeconomics of of how everything is affected. A lot of it has to do with how much private debt there is. So I guess there is a worry there about whether or not that will just simply increase the amount of private debt, because
that would actually reduce the need for private debt.
Right. Could you explain why?
Well, I mean, if you look at the if you had a guaranteed basic income and a job guarantee, and then private sector employment, then like private sector employment and government employment, you can just take those as what we currently have. You get paid a wage for working in a private company or a wage for working as a government employee. If you have the job guarantee, we already have unemployment benefits. Now this is saying it would be higher than unemployment benefits, and you were required to work in some position, which would be something decided by a local council, etc., etc. But we all be funded by government money creation. So the big weakness in how conventional thought is about government is the belief the government borrows in order to spend. We can go into that later.
I understand the concept.
But they create the money. So you create sufficient money that, like about maybe 1% of the population. If you saw full employment in the American situation of being, say, 2 or 3% of the workforce out of a job at any point in time, and that's only because people are moving from one career to another, moving from one city to another, what they call frictional unemployment. That would be your target level to be the only people who don't have a job are those who are in transition in some sense, whether from career or from physical location. So a job guarantee would be there. If you have a cyclical downturn in the economy, you're down in a bust stage of a boom and bust cycle, then people would be laid off at work, and then the private sector declines. You then have people losing their jobs, they go straight onto a job guarantee.
Right.
Okay, but the other people say, I don't want the job guarantee. I want a guaranteed basic income. That'd be a lower amount of money.
Right.
Okay? But in both cases, government created. And then the main thing for people who are like one of the worst things about capitalism is that when a downturn occurs, the people who aren't essentially aren't risk takers in the sense they're working for somebody else. They actually experience the risk. They're suddenly unemployed, and you have all the social decay that goes with that, the pointlessness, the emotional feelings, as well as not being able to spend as much. So the businesses which used to be catering to a larger demand now have a fall in demand. So you're trying to have it as a sort of both macroeconomic stabiliser, but also something which gives people a sense of worth. When you're unemployed and you've lost your job, it's psychologically extremely damaging. So you're getting away from that. But the idea for me of a guaranteed income would be, you might voluntarily leave a job. You don't want to go and do job guarantee work. You've got a creative idea you want to do.
Just to define the job guarantee, is that like basic welfare? Is that what you say?
No, the job guarantee would be this is one of it's not a to me modern monetary theory. The core of that is a logically watertight argument of how government money creation occurs. But on top of that, people who would call themselves MMTers, and I do not call myself an MMTer. I'm MMT compatible.
Right.
I'm not, but I'm not.
You're not in that box.
Not a straight out advocate. They say the job guarantee is there as part of the overall scheme to stabilise the economy. So when you have a downturn, government spending normally rises in an automatic sense because government net spending rises. You have less tax revenue coming in. You're paying out more in welfare payments. So a downturn means government spending responds to the downturn in a semi-automatic stabiliser sense. But this would be amplifying it, saying we're going to give people money that they can spend, so when they're unemployed you're still getting an income, but you're also working, so you're contributing something to society at the same time. That's the idea of the job guarantee.
Oh, okay. I'm understanding that concept, but I just think the job guarantee, like that part of it is losing me a little bit. Is it saying it's guaranteeing people jobs, or are you saying
you get income in return for doing work? Okay?
Right.
So you'd be working 35 hours a week.
Yeah.
Like a 4-day week, I'm guessing would be a preferable arrangement to that to a 5-day week, because you get a bit more flexibility and more chance to do something if your own interest in the 3 days. But it would be basically working for a council most of the time in some position which has been decided by the local council or by the state government or federal government as a worthwhile project, and then you get an income out of that.
So in terms of just within this very theoretical model of there being your guaranteed basic income, your job guarantee, and then working on from up there. With the welfare system, where does that sort of land in this model for you? Is it still a part of it? Do you have to strip away parts of it in order to facilitate the?
Well, this is one thing which Americans confuse a lot, because the quality of American welfare is dreadful.
Right.
Okay. So they say we want universal basic services first off. So what they think is you want to have healthcare.
Okay.
You want to have education.
Yep.
You want decent public transport, etc., etc. America's got virtually none of that. Okay? So a lot of Americans, because they're reacting to the impoverished state of their own social welfare system, they seem to believe that the rest of the world is in the same state.
Right.
No, it's not. I mean, you're a New Zealander.
Yes,
I'm
very
an Australian.
lucky to
Yeah.
be.
It's been degraded very badly over the last 40 years, but you still have reasonable welfare, reasonable health services, as part of what you expect to get as a citizen of New Zealand or a citizen of Australia. The UK has still got the National Health Service. They're undermining it in various ways, which frustrates the hell out of me. And my monitor keep on going there for light reasons alone. Now hang on, it's a little interlude here.
Little plug for Sons.
What you were hearing is...
Something Ultra New Zealand. This is a band that I'm a part of, and it's me and 5 of my best friends. We make some good music, and this is Hey You from our first EP, Vitamin D.
Like it's all alive.
That's your voice.
That is me, yes.
Okay,
That is me indeed.
We'll stop it there for a sec, but
yeah, nah, no worries.
But
that was a good.
a good little segue.
Yeah, good little plug.
Well, that's this sort of thing that I see in terms of a job guarantee is if your job guarantee, you get allocated a particular task. So you used to be, let's say we look at it in terms of interaction and part of the business cycle. Your economy's been booming, it's now gone into a slump.
Yeah.
You get laid off from whoever you're working for. You then go to a job guarantee, and I'm not an expert on this topic, but Pavlina, I've forgotten Pavlina's last name, but Pavlina's written the book on the topic. I must read it. I still haven't read it. But the idea with the councils would be all deciding various projects they want to do, and when anybody gets unemployed, they get allocated to a job guarantee, and they might do reclamation work or working in health, aged care and things of that nature.
Right.
That's the job guarantee idea. I'm sorry if I've done a bastardised version, but that's what I see it as being too. Now, to me, the guaranteed income is a bit like you. You've got a band here, okay, and you want to work on develop that creative orientation. You're willing to sacrifice a higher rate of pay you get in the job guarantee for the freedom to work on this instead. You don't earn, you get a lower income, okay. It's going to be a struggle to pay all your bills, but you'll nonetheless be able to do it. In the meantime, you develop a creative alternative.
Yeah, I completely understand, and I agree. I see the benefits of it. I also will play devil's advocate and say that, arguably, if people really, for example, for me, I'll do it from my own perspective rather than generalizing, because I think that's the best way to do it, and I don't feel as though I'm trying to say that people are a certain way. But for me and my boys that do Sons, the amount of time and effort that we put into this band comparatively to the amount that we could put in is there's a big gap there. And yes, a lot of it has to do with the fact that we all have jobs and we all have to do those things. So that's where that the general basic income would help sort of support that. It would help facilitate that process, and you'd be able to do that thing. But arguably, we could still do it. You can push and do the extra hours and stay up late and kind of really, really commit to those harder times where you're a little bit more tired and you've finished work and all that kind of stuff. And so I suppose that, it's at least worth mentioning that I do believe that, yes, it's a good idea to have universal basic income, and it can support and facilitate that transition between it being something that's a creative outlet and then turning into a career. But you have to make sure that you put that note there of, well, if people are really committed to these things and they put the time in, the outcome will be the same. And
it just, in my personal circumstances right now, I wish I was working non-stop on my work on climate change and on correcting people's misinterpretations of how money is created.
Right.
But that's if I could live on that, then that's what I'd be doing.
Yeah.
Instead, I have to run my crowdfunding adventures. I have to do the courses as well, and some of that still means that I manage to get that creative work done, which is a positive. But you're driven by the need to create an income rather than do the particular creative task you want to work on.
This is where I'd swing back and jump on your side and go, because we all have a finite amount of time here, and I think that's a truth that nobody can deny. And not everybody will, unfortunately, and maybe that's partly to do with the fact that everybody does have to work for necessities first, and there is that foundational structure you have to have in place before you can maybe not only pursue the thing that you enjoy the most or the thing that you love the most, but find it in the first place.
That's right.
A lot of people spend a long time
what the hell do I want to do with my life?
Exactly. So that I really do support that aspect of it. Of if you're talking about using your time to its fullest potential, this would facilitate that in a way that we as a collective have never really seen before, and it kind of. It's breathing room, really, isn't it? That's all it is, and it's not to say that it makes it easy and you get to have all of the amenities that you will have now from working, because you will have a lesser amount of income. But when you're pursuing what it is that you really want to do, if you have your basics, then you're okay with that, because a lot of people, and it's a very interesting thought experiment that I've done for myself. I did it for the first time probably about 2 or 3 years ago, and I sat myself down and I said, okay, just you're rich beyond your wildest dreams monetarily. You've got everything you have access to everything you could ever want in terms of travel and all that kind of stuff. But I really stripped it back and I thought, well, what do I enjoy most about this? And it was that. It was that I have the freedom to pursue the things that I enjoy without the restriction, the time restriction of having to spend a certain amount of hours every week making sure that the lights stay on and whatnot. And I really do love the concept and I support it. I think that my version of it and the way that I refined it down was really around that question of, well, what is essential? What are the things that actually create what are the simplest things that create the most amount of relief for and shared struggles by everybody? And that's where I'll bring in the conversation concept, which is what my podcast is about. So the 3 elements that I found that were the most important for me when I thought about it was food, water, and shelter. If you have those 3 basics, then you have the ability to survive.
Yeah, I mean, I'd go a bit further now and say that it's, well, a small amount of transport, obviously, is vital. And also, I think the internet these days, it's so much a part of our communication. You have to be able to pay for your Wi-Fi. So those are the basics. You've got to have enough to pay the rent, but it's not going to be an elaborate house. You're going to be probably sharing with other people to survive. Enough food to stay alive, but you're not going to be going out to a Michelin star restaurant. No. The other substances, the medical coverage, the
education,
the social security, those sorts of things have to be there as well. But yeah, it means that you can choose to do some creative task, which if you didn't have that job guarantee income, you couldn't do. And like I've had a couple of experiences in my life where I've been in that situation. So I ran a set of seminars on foreign news coverage in Australia. I got this idea when I was working in the Freedom from Hunger campaign. I was the education officer, and my role was to try to raise people's awareness of third world issues in Australia. That was the job description. And in the middle of doing it, I've forgotten how it came about. We decided we had to get into the media. This is back in the days, pre-internet. So we wanted to do a letter writing campaign to the Sydney Morning Herald. We organised that with about 50 people or so. So each day, one person would be given the task, 1 or 2 people, of reading all the newspapers, the Sydney Morning Herald, the Daily Telegraph, the Australian, finding a foreign news story cover they wanted to comment upon and writing a letter to the editor. So we got quite a bit of effect out of that. Then we did the Australian Broadcasting Commission had been created, and the idea of the Australian Broadcasting Commission was that there was a set of social standards the media organisations had to live up to. Now have a guess which one did not live up to those standards? Rupert Murdoch's. So we wrote a submission to the Commission about the way in which Channel 10, which was the Rupert Murdoch's station at the time in Sydney, completely failed to cover foreign news properly. To give you an idea how bad that was, we did a very detailed survey. So we had the group of about 4 people in the group watching the news each night on Channel 10 and taking a detailed coverage of what occurred: advertisements, domestic issues, politics, foreign news, third world news. The day we decided to do our survey was the same day that Vietnam decided to invade Cambodia. We did 10 days of news coverage while Vietnam proceeded through Cambodia for 10 days. And on the final day, Phnom Penh fell. And then on that day, and that day only, Channel 10 finally covered the invasion.
Wow.
Fucking disastrous. We had Rupert Murdoch's balls in our hands, over that. Long story. Anyway, I can cover that one later if you want to get a bit of the detail. But as a part of it, I developed the idea of running seminars between journalists of different countries, where rather than just relying on the daily news service, you would then look at the coverage over a year of each country in the other's press. And I suggested that to the Australia-China Council heard about it because they heard me talking at the concept at a conference on Australia-Asia relations. And then they approached me to do it, and they paid me to do it.
Yeah.
So that was, but in the meantime, while I was waiting for that to happen, I suggested the idea to my employer, the Freedom from Hunger campaign. They turned it down.
Right.
And I said, well, unless you reverse that decision, I'm resigning. Okay? And they didn't, so I resigned. And by the time I got funding, so I lived on the dole while I was trying to organise all this stuff. Spent about 6 months running my savings down. I think I had $2,000 in savings when it started. This is back in 1980.
Yeah.
About that time. I had $2,000 when I started. The dole was not sufficient to pay the rent and everything else. By the time I finally got the confirmation I was going to get funding for this from the Australia-China Council, I had $4 in my bank account.
Oh.
Okay? So like I did all that. I took the risk of doing it. The seminars were quite successful in China. But I really stuck my neck out. Okay?
Yeah.
And getting to the point I'd have to get a job and abandon the whole idea. So I think for that sort of thing, for starting a rock and roll band, for learning computer programming, which I also did at another stage while unemployed, something like a guaranteed basic income would mean you can do that without jeopardising your potential survival. Whereas I did it and did jeopardise. So I was lucky I managed to finally get funding. Literally, I had $4 left in my bank account.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I completely understand, and I've been in similar situations in terms of the necessity of having those welfare systems in place and needing to have that support, and I think that's why I had to bring in that note earlier of, well, do people within those situations, are they all trying to get a leg up, or are a lot of them just coasting? And that's where the diversity of people comes in, which is very complicated, and you can see why people argue that side of it. I think that for me, the whole idea of the conversation concept in terms of those three basics, right? And the reason why I stripped it back, because I completely agree that yes, internet and transport, they're important, but you won't die if you don't have the internet, and you won't die if you have to walk everywhere.
But you might not be able to build a business if you don't have the internet or transportation.
Right, but if you have the means to stay alive, you can achieve quite a bit.
Yeah, you can hop on a bicycle and ride somewhere.
Exactly. You can run, you can walk, whatever. You don't have the internet. It's like there's ways to communicate. You can get in touch with somebody that does have access to the internet. You can use.
So you're putting a lower level to basic.
I'm shoving it right down to like the absolute. What actually keeps you alive, and even arguably shelter is some people say it's a stretch in terms of staying alive, but I disagree, because I think having a place to stay is essential.
For humans, we don't sleep in the open.
Obviously, and I think the reason why people push back on shelter first and foremost is because it's a much more complicated system in terms of the market for housing and all of that. It's
that's another thing that conventional economists are completely stuffed up.
Right.
So my feeling, the housing dilemma we face now is not something that existed 50 years ago.
Yeah.
Okay. And you look back at the house prices 50 years ago and rents 50 years ago, it was quite possible to buy a place with a small amount of leverage on top of your own savings and so on. So that particular dilemma is a creation of neoliberalism.
Right. And one of the many.
But
I think that's where too, with that being a popularised opinion and it being a very mainstream thought of how things operate, it does create a lot of those misconceptions among your average person that might not have invested the time into learning. And like I've mentioned to you before, and I will continue to say on every podcast and every conversation I ever have, I'm very new, and I feel as though even if I spend the rest of my life trying to learn about economics or politics or psychology, any specific field, you're never going to get all the way, and you're never going to know everything. And even if you do become a master in some sort of field, there's always an element of chaos to every system, and that element, typically the most common within all of them, is the fact that people are a part of that system, and people make decisions that you can't predict, and random stuff happens, and that's why you can't have such a blanket thing of how stuff works. So, but if you were to try and apply any sort of blanket, it would be, in my opinion, that food, water, shelter aspect of it, because you can't deny that those three aspects are what keep people
They're
alive.
vital, yeah.
They are, and I think that yes, there's a lot of questions about the practical side of it, the logistics, infrastructure, all of that sort of those things that need to be in place in order to facilitate something like that happening. And we will go into that, but a preface that I always have to put before I kind of get into this topic is that the point of me having this conversation with people and talking about it is there's a reason why I say conversation concept and not the conversation, is because I'm not actually talking about the practical side of it. I think for me it's more of a curiosity of whether people actually resonate with the idea, whether or not when I say, well, let's just refine it down to these three things, whether people go, no, like you need all this other stuff, or whether they go, oh no, yeah, those are the things that we all have in common, you know. And some, like, you know, even like you said before, New Zealand and Australia, very lucky we have, even though there's their own parts to it that aren't great, you know, we have a better healthcare system in terms of welfare compared to America. You
Absolutely,
know? And so the diversity there is something that needs to be spoken about, you know, and figured out in its own conversation and a different thing. But fundamentally, in terms of your food, water and shelter, everybody needs those things in every country, right? And so I guess that what I'm aiming to achieve throughout this process of talking to people about this isn't necessarily change in a physical sense, but change in the paradigm and making it a more common concept in people's minds of, well, have you ever heard about the conversation concept? You know, I would really like that to be something that whether anything happens over my entire lifetime, I don't mind. But if in 50 years, if I could Google it and it's something that millions of people are talking about, I consider that to be a real change, because I think that if you look back at anything in history, everything that ever happens is a culmination of people that have thought about something, discussed something, and taken action, and in that order. Yeah. So before you can take action, you have to have spoken about it, and before you can speak about it, you have to have thought about it. So as someone who's thought about this specific thing, it's kind of, that's my reason for wanting to talk to people about it. And then from there you have all the endless fun of going, well, what if and maybe and who knows what's the right way to go about it. Nobody, but I believe that if you have enough people talking about it, that's when you'll find those answers.
Critical mass of people.
Exactly. But it'll still be, it won't be the same answer for New Zealand and America. It won't be the same answer for Australia and China. Yeah. It'll differ depending on what's available. But I think that the exciting part for me and for a lot of people that are having these conversations and this conversation now is that we're starting to realize that, well, we do have the resources, we do have the technology, and we do have the infrastructure in a lot of countries, not in all of them, but we have those things in place to actually start having the conversation of like, well, are we going to facilitate this? Is this something we want to do? And what does that look like? And here we are talking about, you know, universal basic income, guaranteed basic income, and the idea of whether or not giving people money is a good idea, or whether, and if it is, how is that distributed? How does that affect people's motivation? Which is where the sort of the psychology comes into it. I think my concept is more based around the question of, is there a way, and I think you'll enjoy this, is there a way to facilitate the distribution of, say, very basic foods and water and housing for people through a state-operated thing? And now I'm not talking about complete socialism, because I think that that's where, you know, for example, like Marx talked about the whole idea of eventually dissolving the state and it becoming everybody owns everything. In my opinion, I think that actually contradicts human nature, because we want to grow. We need to grow. We need to be. We need to compete, you know, with each other. It's kind of. Well,
we're a weird species, because we both cooperate and we compete. Yeah. As part of both is part of our. If you go back to, you know, Cro-Magnon society, what we know of early human societies, you have small groups of about 150 people, large groups of about 7,000 to 10,000 people with a tribal community, and you got your status in those societies by what you did for other people. Right. It was a huge part of where your being comes. So you want to work Okay, you're doing stuff to create for the community's benefit, but you're also competing.
Exactly.
You're the best flint maker, and there's the second best flint maker. Eh?
Yeah.
The second best is trying to catch up with you. So that competitive and cooperative is part of our nature, but it's all in the context of a society.
Right.
And that's, I think, the classic, so far as I'm aware, non-social species is the Tasmanian devil.
Okay.
So Tasmanian devils tend to be solitary. They get together and mate, obviously. They're also found over carcasses. They tend to be a scavenger. And they only get together, then they're socialising or eating a dead animal somewhere. Okay? And then they go off and do their individual lives. And in some ways, the vision that neoclassicals have of us, Homo economicus, is almost the same thing. It'd be better of a society of Tasmanian devils than humans, because a huge part of what we get as satisfaction out of ourselves is other people's regard for us.
Right.
And a huge part of those early societies was fundamentally a gifting culture, not a mercenary culture. So we didn't do stuff to get something from somebody else. We did to contribute to the group.
Right.
And our status came out of how well we contributed, the quality of what we did. And so that group focus has always been part of us. And this is why we're such a dominant species, because no other species, so far as we're aware, can cooperate as far as we can.
Right.
You can find differences with orcas and and dolphins and so on. They can and elephants. We're the only species that cooperates and got opposable thumbs. Okay? So we've done so much technological stuff that isn't possible for other species on this planet, and that cooperative side of our nature is why we've been so successful. If you said it's our individual competitiveness that gave us that, well, you're describing Tasmanian devils or tigers, etc., non-pack animals. We're the ultimate pack animal, and to not recognise that part of our nature is to completely misunderstand what makes us function as a species.
Yeah, it's sort of a contrast between compassion and jealousy.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, well, I do this because I want to give, but also, like, you see somebody else with a lot to give and you go, well, why do they have so much? Like, how do I get so much? And, it's like, well, we...
have you seen, we're our general species type is simians. Okay. That's the term for apes and monkeys and so on. And you've seen some wonderful experiments with, I think, capuchin monkeys, where they have two monkeys next to each other in a cage, and they get them to do some physical task which they get a reward. And then one monkey's been given a reward of grapes, and they've both been given grapes, and they were cool about it. And then one is given a piece of cucumber. Looks at the cucumber, tastes it, yuck, and throws it back at the experimenter. Fuck you. I want the one that's again next to me. I'm not going to do this for shitty bloody cucumber. So we have an innate sense of justice.
Right.
And it isn't, and even like I've even seen it in one of the great advantages of YouTube and videos. You can see so much that people have put together from natural science around the world. And one of the most remarkable things I saw is a pair of killer whales, which one way they capture seals is to literally throw themselves on the beach, grab they've got a seal lying there, grab it and throw it and eat it. And there were 2 killer whales that had eaten 2 or 3 baby seals they'd captured that way. And they were then literally throwing the surviving one between them, like on the nose, and throwing it like throwing a ball and playing catch with a live seal.
Oh my God.
Well, this is being videoed by some naturalists. And then one of the 2 killer whales takes that baby, of course, is terrified. They're going to be about to be eaten by these huge animals and being hurled around like an object. Took it back to the beach and left it there. They'd had enough food with the first 2.
They left it behind.
They let it go. Yeah. So you see, even animals we think are predatory,
savage, no thoughts.
No, they've got empathy. Empathy is not something unique to humans. I've even I just saw a recent one which you watch it and go, what the hell is going on here? A fish, which is flopping around on the. This is before AI, so I know it's real. Flopping around on a sandbank, not able to get back to the water, and 2 hunter birds just collectively picked it up and put it back in the water. Now they may have been, the sort of, if you think about the Richard Dawkins selfish gene approach,
Okay.
That might see. If you know Richard Dawkins' work?
No, please.
So he's the evolutionary theorist that I'm not particularly fond of. But he says all our behaviour is driven by genes are selfish. Genes want to reproduce themselves.
Right.
It ends up being a very semi-narcissistic view of how we evolve.
Yeah.
But this level of cooperation and empathy, can be remarkable, and you see it in wild animals as well as in us. So to have a theory of human behaviour that leaves out that side of our nature is just totally barren.
It's not right. And I think it's interesting because with concepts like these, conversations like this, people often, as individuals, will see and respond to these questions of some sort of collective sharing or new system or big change, and they'll immediately go, I love it, great idea, but it won't work. And you say, why? Oh, well, because people. And I can't help but go, what people? Who are they?
Are you talking about? Yeah.
How many people do I need to talk to before there's proof that the people that you're talking about is actually just an idea in your head? You know, I'm not saying all people are good. I'm not saying that everybody's empathetic. I'm not saying that there aren't a certain percentage of people out there that are terrible people and that want whatever they want and they'll step on whoever they need to step on to get it. And I'm not that naive to assume that, you know, it's all butterflies and rainbows.
Yeah.
But I'm intrigued to know the numbers. You know,
yeah.
What's the ratio?
Yeah.
Is there really that many? Because I've met a lot of people over my life, not millions, but you know, in terms of my ratios of my own, what would we call it? My pool, my study as a person. You know, let's call it that.
Your life experience.
My life experience. Yeah, you've got a certain percentage of people that you meet, and you just go, oh man, you're a piece of work, you know, and there's something going on. But
most of them are economists. Not quite, but still.
But bear with me. Even when you meet those people, I myself, being an empathetic person, can't help but wonder what happened to you. You know, what happened along the way that caused you to be this way, and how long would it take if I spent my time on you to figure out what that is? Now, I'd say it would be a lot less time than it would be to try change that person, because I believe that individual change is down to the individual. I think that everybody always has their own choice of whether they're going to give a shit or not. And a lot of the time, your environment will dictate whether you have the motivation and the self-love to do that. But it's still worth taking into consideration when you're talking about how the general public behaves as a collective, or what's possible as a collective when you're asking for big change, and whether that be economical change or any type of change when it comes to complex systems. And I suppose that all we can ever do is look back at our history, really, when it comes to what we know to be true. We can only base it on the mistakes that we've made. And I think that we're at a point now where there's been some serious fuck-ups in terms of wars and political ideologies and the combination of those things over time and the way in which that's affected our psyche as a collective and the things that we see as acceptable as a collective now. You know, just the word communism, it's just flags go up in the air. People go, even though actual communism has never been realised.
Well, I mean, that's one little area I wave a flag over, because you know, I get so many people that are capitalists. I mean, we haven't tried capitalism yet. Well, their definition of capitalism, there can't be a government, you know, can't be fiat money. It's got to be, you know, fuck it. That's the system we're in. It's called capitalism. Get used to it. Equally the same for the socialist system. Yes, you might say, well, that's not really how it should. That's how it did work out. Okay, it's like I sort of understand the knee-jerk reaction a lot of people have to communism. What I try to do whenever I have to raise these issues is go back to anthropology and the research we've got into the nature of human societies before we became this sedentary civilization we are now. Because for most of our existence, we were nomads. And we worked in small bands of people who would, you know, you might have a general area where you stay, but you had to follow the animals. If you go back to when humans evolved, it's about 300,000 years ago, Homo sapiens came along. There've been, you know, the more we look into how we evolved as a species, the more variations we find in those species. So there's yet another supposed recent discovery of another subspecies of humans in China has come forward in the last 6 months to a year. So we know there's Homo habilis and Homo the Neanderthalis. We have so many different species we know that existed, but all of them existed in small groups, larger than any other members of the simian family, because our brains can handle more personal interactions. But it was always small groups, and when you look at what happened in those small groups, that's what, when people talk about their ideal version of communism, it goes right back to those days, where you work cooperatively within a group, but also competitive behaviour, the combination of the two. So cooperation was an essential part of why we're a successful species. And people go, communism, and then they're looking at this bastardised variation, with misinterpreting Marx to begin with, after 7,000 years of sedentary civilization, with all the distortion that's done to what our evolutionary past was. You get knee-jerk critiques of communism by people who think they're pro-capitalist, knee-jerk criticisms of capitalism by people who think they're communist, not knowing the history behind all of those groups. I just find it infuriating to have those conversations.
I agree, and I think the hard part, the understandable part is, we talked about how much time you have for your own creative venture outside of finding your necessities, right? Add becoming literate or well-informed historically on political issues or ideologies on top of that, when you don't have an interest. People, it's a very hard thing to imagine people have time to do. How can you expect somebody to know what, communism meant or what Marx meant without spending a decade or something?
Well, for example, in the terms of Marx, my first exposure to groupthink was neoclassical economics, because I led the student revolt at Sydney University back in the 1970s, and I believed in neoclassical economics, and then I had shown a huge fallacy inside it, so I became part of a group critiquing it, and I flipped very rapidly from somebody who was very capitalist in my thinking, competitive capitalist type attitudes, to being a critic of the whole thing. But most people who did that became Marxists.
Interesting.
Now I knew that all I knew about Marx before I started reading Marx directly was the labour theory of value, and that argued that all value comes from labour. So workers work for 12 hours a day, 6 hours is necessary to reproduce their means of subsistence, the food and water and shelter. The other 6 is surplus value that gets expropriated by the capitalist, yada, yada, yada. And it sees, fundamentally, it was used as a critique of capitalism, saying, the workers create the value, they should receive the value, etc., etc. And I couldn't stomach the idea that labour was the only thing that's created value. So when after the student revolt at Sydney University back in 1973, the left collective, and it was definitely left-wing, said, let's read Marx, okay? Let's use a Sydney summer. Can you imagine? Here we are, Sydney bloody summer. We're sitting inside the main quadrangle of Sydney University in a dark sandstone room, collectively reading Karl Marx Volume 1 Capital. And in reading it, I found it was an absolutely brilliant explanation for why it wasn't true that labour created all value. This is part of Marx's dialectical philosophy. And I worked out that Marx's explanation for what he called use value and exchange value led to the interpretation that labour was not the only source of value. Any input to production could create a surplus in that sense. And I went to raise it with my fellow 20-year-old lefty Marxists and got laughed at. Okay. Now I then went through and I read everything Marx ever wrote in economics between 1844 and the final publication of volume 3 of Capital, which was 1894, so 50 years of Marx in that sense, and found where he came up with an innovative idea. Can I convince Marxists of it? they're stuck in that particular interpretation. So there's a rigidity to how we think about the nature of society now, which comes out of the horrific experiences we've had, from slavery to feudalism to capitalism as a liberation from that, to the dark satanic mills of the 18th and 19th century. All this stuff, all these distortions are laid on us how we think about the whole issue of cooperation versus competition. But if you want to get the clarifying what makes sense for us as a community, you go back in anthropology, you look at how those societies functioned, and you find that there was both elements. Cooperation was absolutely vital, but you also had competitive behaviour. I'm going to be a better flint maker than you are, that sort of thing. I'm going to throw a spear further than you can, but it's all done in a cooperative sense at the same time. And that's what when I look at what we would want to have as a vision of our society, we need to recreate that capacity to interact in a tiny group of people where you are very intensely and emotionally connected to all those people. That's not the society we live in.
No, I really do like your point of be real with what is, rather than what you think things should be in your head, or how things are meant to operate, or what one specific word means based on the things that you've read and how things are going wrong because they don't specifically fall under that exact category. I think it's something that I agree with wholeheartedly in terms of, well, it is what it is. So look at what it is and let's move forward. Yes, be aware of the past, but don't, holding on to some sort of ideal of what a specific word means is, it's an endless...
Well, a particular ideal of a society. I mean, I get so many... because when I came up with the critique of Marx's theory of value, you can imagine how popular I was with Marxists. Okay? Yeah. I've been equally unpopular with neoclassicals on the same sort of front.
Yeah, that's why when you Google is Steve Keen, it comes up with a charlatan at the end.
I enjoyed that.
Yeah, that was a Google. So continue.
I just, something about me has made me want to understand rather than being committed to a particular orientation. So I've seen so many people who went from being, became Marxists and got to overthrow capitalism. You got the capitalists got to overthrow communism. For Christ's sake, work out what is the essence of humanity, and you've got to go right back through anthropology to see what those essential societies are. And look, as David Graeber argues, there are so many different forms of organisation that humans have tried at various times. But to me, the fundamental nature, we were a nomadic species which were successful as predators because we cooperated.
Right.
Okay, and that's the essence of, we compete within the confines of cooperation, and then the reason we broke into multiple different civilizations at various times is because the huge amount of our brain power is used to work out what our relationships are with people in a particular community. So you've heard of what's called the Dunbar number?
No. Oh, yes, it's the maximum amount of people you can have a
which is about 150. Yeah. And it basically, it's a combinatorial thing. Yeah. It's how many, if you and I were going to throw a party somewhere, we'd invite all the people we know. Who do you suit with who? You've got to not just know, I like you and you like me, but I know those two don't like each other, but those ones do.
Yeah.
So
you have to know the interpersonal relationships.
So it becomes an enormous number of potential combinations, but our brain maxes out at about 150 that we can actually do that intelligence with. So the intensity of relationships that comes out of that is something which, living in the modern society, we have no idea of how deep that can be. One of my favourite reading experiences is reading Nelson Mandela's The Long Road to Freedom. And he explained not just his whole period of being a revolutionary and fighting to overthrow apartheid. He went right back to when he was a member of the, I think it's called Xhosa tribe, and what it was like to be a young boy in a Xhosa community. And he said at one point, I could imagine nothing better than to be a member of the Xhosa tribe. The intensity of relationships that exists with 150 people, roughly speaking, in your village, or maybe 120, let's say, some people from other tribes, the tribal get-togethers bring together numerous small communities into large aggregations. So you've got to know people outside your own specific immediate community as well.
Yeah.
But the intensity of bonding that occurs, and we've completely lost it. We live in totally disaggregated societies. You have reasonably strong bonds with your own nuclear family and extensions of that. You've got your close friends, people like I've got friends that go back 50 years.
Yeah.
I couldn't imagine my life without them. But to have 150 people that you're living in the same community with, that you're intensely involved with, we've lost that. And if I think we ever have to get to the stage where people haven't got the mental illnesses and breakdowns and psychoses that we have today, we need to be able to recreate that scale of living.
Right. I think it's an interesting thought in terms of what still has been maintained, which I think the nomadic aspect of it definitely has. We move around, even though we don't move as a group. We move as an individual with connections to our group, which we maintain through, you video call your parents when you go overseas, and you make sure you're still maintaining those connections when you're far away, which is the gift of the internet. And obviously,
that's one reason I disagree with you, by the way, on the. Well, I think given how dependent we are upon that theme of communication. And also, if you want to start a business,
right, with that internet is an essential.
I'm sorry, the food, water, and internet, and shelter.
No, I agree. I was just thinking about it, sort of in the background there, about what would happen if, because of the reason I believe it to be so essential is if it wasn't there, how would it affect everything?
Yeah.
And it is fair to say that if internet just disappeared,
you'd be totally isolated.
Yeah,
so
it wouldn't be good.
Yeah.
And people's ability to actually survive with what they have is, it's arguably we've lost that as well, as individuals. And this is where it comes to, what is it? And that's where we land in the same place of, rather than talking about what should be or how things are meant to be or what's perfect, let's talk about what is, and let's talk about what we can do with what is, and what are the things that we need to facilitate as a collective that we can literally share. I mean, we tell children, sharing is caring. We don't do it. Everything has a price tag in between it, and my concept is all based around the idea of I say the word free, but it's more of a clickbait thing and just to grab people in. But obviously, money is involved in every system. It's an exchange. It's a promise. It's how the economy works. And so, I guess that looking at what is, the question would be is there a way to facilitate some sort of small, I don't know if this is even the right wording, because like we were saying before, it's hard to sort of specify what each thing is, but in my head, this is how I word it, is a small socialist cog that helps to maintain the bigger capitalist cog that's always running,
And that's actually one essential failing of our current conversations about societies, because people are putting up polar opposites.
It has to be one or the other.
Capitalism or socialism, and state or private. But again, one of the curious little incidents in my life was watching a video about Buddha. Okay, and apparently the argument was Buddha that got the idea of the balance, the yin and the yang, from hearing a young child being tutored about how to play a musical instrument like a sitar, I think, from a boat that was passing along a river. He was sitting. It's called the Tree of Enlightenment. He's seeing this boat go past, and this instructor's trying to teach a child how to tune the devices. Now, if you make it too tight, it won't give you a good note, and make it too slack, it won't give you a note at all. There's a balance between the two. And that was one of the points of enlightenment for Buddha, that he realized it isn't extremes, you have to have balances, yin and yang. Those two different forces come together to create a greater whole. So that's one thing I like about Eastern philosophy compared to Western in general. The realization you need a balance. You don't want the two extremes.
So my interpretation of that is it's a lot to do with exactly as you said, like the Tao, yin and yang, and the line in the middle is supposedly the divine, balance between the two. And I think that I really do I see the two as, so you can see it as masculine and feminine. You can see it as order and chaos, and they're both essential. And just as much as I think the reason why they're so essential is because that's, not to get, we won't go down the path of, do we have free will? That's a whole other philosophy. But, assuming that we just work with what is in the present moment, you always have the option of doing something crazy or doing what's supposedly a social norm, of having a good structure within your life, or just absolutely throwing everything out the window and just taking drugs and mucking around and not giving a crap. And, you can, as a society, we can see through each other, we're symbols of those extremes. And I can see a beggar on the street and go, oh, I don't want to be that. And so that could be a little note to me of, maybe I need a little bit more order in my life, and it might be a subconscious thing, but it's a reminder of like what those extremes are. But in the same breath, that beggar might have only been there for a year or 2 years, and then maybe he sat there for 2 years and went, I need a bit more order in my life. We always have that choice to swing either which way. And ideally, you have a bit of both. You have to make sure that you have a stable foot in something that you have a belief in, or something that helps you feel like you have structure and something that you understand. But you can't say that's it, the conversation's over. I'm a Marxist, I'm a communist, I'm a this, I'm a that, and everybody else needs to get with this program, because that's not how it works. And I've found in my own human experience that my favourite people are people that have an inner truth, a centre truth, but they're ready to flip it like that, Not like that as in it doesn't matter enough to them that they're willing to change for anything, but you're open-minded and you're like, well, okay, I have an idea of how things operate. I've now been presented with a new concept of how something operates from somebody else's perspective. I'm going to take into account the information that they've given me. I'm going to see whether or not that fits with what I've got going on. And even if I don't fully change, I might take a part of it. And that's that old adage of, a wise person knows there's something to learn from each person. You know?
And a wise person knows that they don't know some things.
Yes. And so I agree that there needs to be a balance between those two. And in terms of that story of the Buddha, I think that we can relate that economically or, politically, in terms of, what structures we have. You do need to have both. And at the moment, we're just a little heavy on the capitalist side of things, arguably a lot. But the thing that makes up for it, in my opinion, is just human tenacity. We're like, I can do this. I can push through. I can figure it out. I don't need anybody to help me. Like, I can get on with it, And then as soon as we, there's a certain percentage of people that overcome those difficulties and get to that point, they immediately turn around and go, well, I did it. So what are you complaining about, And everybody down the bottom's going, I can use a helping hand here. And over time, the problem with that has become bigger and bigger because of, like you said, the difference in what it used to be to get a house. The amount of effort that now needs to be put in order to overcome that threshold
is so great.
Is so much more. And it's not that people aren't capable, it's just that it takes more time now. Which means that during that period, people have to maintain, like you said, a good mental health. They have to make sure that they don't fall off too much into the chaos and become psychotic or abusive with drugs or whatever. And the even harder part about that is like, okay, this is all assuming you have a good start. You've got 2 loving parents that look after you. That's incredibly rare nowadays.
I know.
So I think that the reason why, for me, to sort of bring it all back to what we're talking about in terms of the need for that little bit more support, and whether it be a UBI, whether it be some sort of functioning system that distributes food, water and shelter and internet to people, the reason for it is because I think, based on my own human experience, is that more and more people are coming from a place of understanding that things are hard, that life has an aspect of suffering, and that have more connections within their Dunbar, their circle of immediate people that they know that have had bad starts, that have had rough things going on, that have had it hard, X, Y, Z. And I don't think that I don't think it's entirely negative. I think it's got a lot to do with why mental health is such a big conversation these days.
Yeah.
I think it's rising the amount of empathy in people because they realise that, well, everyone's got some shit going on. But the trouble is that aspect of overcoming that threshold and all of that, people are so much more likely to just, well, I don't want to generalise, but for me, you know, I've had two loving parents and grown up in a great situation. And like I said to you earlier, I've struggled with my own mental health issues. And you know, when you're in a position where you've had a good upbringing and you're still struggling, you can't help but look around and go, well, fuck, I've got all the privilege in the world, which I will never deny. I'm very blessed and I'm very lucky, and I will always make that note. And yet still, I've had those moments where I've just tipped a little bit too much on the chaos side and gone, shit, where's the order? And then when I look at the order that's there and what's in place, I go, this the structure's like,
I don't want that,
Yeah, it's a very hard balance, and I think that the benefit in an ideal situation of facilitating something like a UBI or making those things accessible, like food, water and shelter and stuff to people, is that, yes, it alleviates that pressure of when somebody wants to do a creative outlet, but it can also create just time for people to just heal. Chill and heal. You know, okay, look, you've had a rough go of it. Fair enough. You're looking at the system, you're going, fuck this, why would I want to work for anybody? Why would I want to do anything? You're right. Just sit back, man. You don't have to. And that's where it goes
Time to recover.
Yeah, recovery. And that's where it goes into some very theoretical, you know, conversations that you can't really answer, but what's the ratios there of people that need time to recover, and what's the ratio of people that'll go, yes, now I can really push and I can get on with it. And I'm going to be optimistic and say that I think that the majority of people with that little bit of breathing room, the amount that will go, yes, now I can pursue what I want to do, versus the amount that are like, finally I can rest, it's going to balance out. Not to mention the people that need a rest, you know. How long do you rest for before you're like,
you get bored.
Yeah, you do.
There's actually, you ever see the old movie, they're called The Young Ones, it's an English TV series?
No.
Okay, I'm sure you'd love it. Okay. Okay. But there's also punk.
Okay.
Pardon me. Speaking of punk, another music. It's not bad.
Stop it. Yeah, but it's a break in the flow of the conversation, so it's a contradiction.
Well, there's in The Young Ones.
Yeah.
Okay. It's actually sending up a song by Cliff Richard. You know that one? Okay, you Cliff Richard?
Yeah, I know of him. Yeah.
Okay. We might try playing that on the music later.
Yeah.
But there's a total stoned out loser. I can't think of it. It's not Wayne, but it's there's always just. But there's also a punk who's in there trying to disturb stuff, and there's one particular scene where they're all going to school or university, that sort of thing, and the punk comes back from home. God, thank Christ, that's the holidays. Can't wait to relax. Get on board. Instant boredom. They go in and burn a house down, all that sort of stuff. So you do, you know, being able to do nothing can get incredibly boring after a while. So inactivity, I see a lot of people, particularly Americans from MMT, talking about the idea of a guaranteed, what they call universal basic income, what I call a guaranteed. And they think, people are going to lie on their bum all day and do bugger all. No, it's actually a fairly unpleasant thing to do bugger all day. Even getting stoned all day can be very unpleasant.
Yes.
So you want to be able to do something, like the state of boredom will drive you into wanting to be doing something else. So I think that the proportion which would actually be literally sitting around doing bugger all is a tiny fraction. And if it's larger than a tiny fraction, it's because of the impact of society, on people, whether that's a capitalist or a socialist society, the impact that huge structures that intimidates a lot of people. If you go back and look at, again, early Cro-Magnon societies from, we're seeing archaeological research and anthropology, and even looking at comparative studies of things like the Kalahari Bushmen, who still can live a nomadic lifestyle in modern societies as well. There's certainly time lying around doing bugger all, okay? But there's a huge amount of time lying around entertaining each other. Then there's the going hunting and gathering, the food collection, political organisation inside. The people who just do bugger all are a ridiculously small fraction, And in most of those old societies, if they did exist, they sort of got driven out. So it's not a survival trait. It's not something which has evolved as a survival trait amongst humans.
Yeah.
If it happens now, it's a sign of how dysfunctional the society we're living in is for the individual.
Yeah. And, assume that we don't make a change, or there's no breathing room given. It doesn't look good, What happens to those people? And it becomes, well, how would I put it? The version of it that we can see is like we're talking about. When you have somebody that goes, I'm now, my identity is associated with this idea because it brings me so much comfort, because in my head, it relieves me of the pain that I feel because everything isn't the way that it is, or that I need it to be in order for me to have a break. People attach to an idea because they go, that sounds like when that comes true, I'll get a break.
Yeah.
And now this is where I'll bring it back to why I have peace of mind with none of this change physically happening during my lifetime, but the conversation still happening and growing. It is enough for me to feel satisfied, right? And the reason being, and I learned this through meditation and my own sort of personal practices, just with spending time with myself. And what I learned is I came up with this concept of, actually, arguably, I don't even know if I did come up with this concept. It's probably somebody else's, and I'm just repeating it in my own words. But you can have either an outcome. Oh, you want to just pop that?
Sorry?
That low.
Oh, hang on, it's low battery. Pardon me. Okay.
Put that.
Low battery mode. Okay.
Nice. So
still recording? Yeah. Okay. Good. Okay.
Well, good to know we've got a little bit of a time limit.
We've got to shut up at some point. Yeah.
So I think you'll like this as a sort of towards the end. You can either have an outcome-based reality, or you can have an action-based reality, right? And the factor that changes within the two is how you experience failure. So I'll use a simple example of shooting a basketball, right? If you have an outcome-based reality, then you only you experience failure every time that you miss. Okay. And it's a negative experience. You're like, oh, I've missed, damn. You only have a positive experience when it goes in, because that's the outcome that you're looking for from your task, right? The other side of that is an action-based reality, which is, I'm shooting a basketball for the sake of shooting a basketball. I love shooting basketballs. It's great, which means that every time I miss and I fail, there's no negative experience of failure. It's a positive experience. It's like, oh, I missed. Well, that's great. I still get to shoot the basketball. And so I think that a lot of people, I won't generalize again. I do that a lot. But myself, for a long time, I wanted the basketball to go in, and I wasn't allowed to be happy until it went in. Okay. So say the basketball for me was the conversation concept being actualized in real life, and a utopian society being created in some shape or form. Or maybe it was me being financially stable in a sense that I don't have to worry about money anymore. That was the basketball going in. But every day I'm shooting and it's not going in because that change hasn't happened. I don't have the money that I want yet. And what you're doing in that case is you're putting your happiness, or not even happiness, I'm going to call it peace, because I don't think that that's a good metric, is looking for happiness. I think looking for peace is a much better metric. But that peace that you get from
or contentment from achieving the task,
if you just bring that power back to yourself and go, well, actually, I get it from doing the task, then you're enjoying the journey. The man who enjoys walking will always go further than the man that likes the destination. And I think that that's where it comes back to, like we said, about purpose and what is your thing that you like. And it doesn't have to be a thing. It could just be the pursuit of finding a thing. But as long as you acknowledge that you, in taking action, going towards that task, or having found the thing that you like and pursuing that thing, if you give yourself the paradigm, if you have the perspective of, oh, well, I actually enjoy this for doing it and for the sake of doing it, and that's enough for me, then you're done. Not done as in done the journey. You're going to continue to walk, but you're done trying to wait for it to be enjoyable. You enjoy it now because you're enjoying it for the sake of the action. And I think that perspective is typically flipped, and people are more often in an outcome-based mindset when they attach to these ideas and say, this is it, this is the be-all and end-all, because they, just like that idea, have their peace or their contentment separate from themselves.
Yeah.
So too does their idea of what society is meant to be like, rather than saying, well, this is what it is, here's what I do control.
Yeah.
Let me make sure that I focus on what I can control, get enjoyment out of the actions that contribute towards those things, and everything becomes much more enjoyable. You know, you enjoy the journey, and you find yourself, you know, having crazy, you know, meetings and coincidences and serendipitous moments, and this for me is one of those moments. I'm like, wow, what a crazy thing that I.
Well, there's a crazy guy to come and visit me here.
Yeah.
Like, you know, because you're a New Zealander.
Yep.
Of Irish descent.
Yep.
And you came back to Ireland to meet up with family for the first time?
Well, it's Christmas. It's the first time all of my family has been together in Dublin for ever.
Okay.
So it's
Who planned it?
Well, my sister fell in love with an Irishman, funnily enough.
Sorry?
My sister, she fell in love with an Irishman. I have two older sisters.
Okay.
And one of them lives in New Zealand, married to a Kiwi bloke, and one of them has gone over to Ireland, and she's just had her first baby not long before she went over.
Yeah.
And so a year before now, she said, look, we're going to have her christening just after Christmas. Whoever can make it, we'd love to see you there, but put the invitation out really early so people had time to prepare and
how
less
many
time to make
come
excuses. Everyone that I've grown up with, other than my auntie Justine and Tony and Ryan and Jordan, who are some other cousins, they're holding it down at home looking after the dogs. But my other auntie and my two cousins that I grew up with in Dannyvirk, small town, they're going to come over. My mum, my dad, both my sisters, and my sister's children, my niece and nephew and her partner Matt, they're all there. So it's going to be crazy. And then as well as that, all the family that's already there in Dublin. It's a beautiful time. I'm very lucky and glad to be doing it. And I thought, well, you know, while I'm over here,
why not hop over to Amsterdam?
I mean, it's an hour on the plane. You can't do that when you're in New Zealand.
This is the thing. Like, one thing about Australians and New Zealanders, if you're going to travel in the modern world, you can't complain about a 12-hour plane trip.
No.
Like I've actually one thing I will do. Don't go Air Canada. That's the one.
I had a similar experience on the way over.
Bloody awful experience with Air Canada.
Yeah.
I'll never fly with them again.
Yeah.
But like a flight from Toronto to Vancouver, which is one side of Canada, to the other, I think it was about 4 hours. I barely blinked because you'd be Australian. If you're going to go anywhere, minimum 12 hours to Los Angeles.
Yeah.
You know, 24 hours to get to London.
Yep.
10 hours to get to Bangkok, etc., etc.
Yeah.
We're just used to large travels.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a breeze for us.
Yeah. It's light work. Have a snack, jump on.
So how many times have you made other trips overseas?
This is my third time.
Third time
over here. Yeah, I did a gap year to England when I was 18. I did a trip over to Dublin, and I lived for a year and a half when I was 20.
Yeah.
And then now coming back for the third time, only for a couple of weeks this time around. But I made use of it, not only seeing you, but I also stopped in South America on my way.
You actually came from New Zealand to South America.
Yeah, so I went from New Zealand to Uruguay. So I went from Napier to Auckland.
There's actually a flight?
Uruguay. Yeah, well, you have to go through Chile. You go through
Santiago? Santiago.
Yeah. And then from there I went to Montevideo, which is capital city. Shout out to all the Uruguayans. And then from there went to Costa Rica, specifically Cartago, which is just south of San Jose, which is the capital, but it's like all one big sort of thing. They just kind of plotted apart. Seb, my man, shout out to you.
Sorry?
Shout out to Seb, my man. I was just saying hello. And then from there went through Toronto to Dublin, and that was
Toronto.
Yeah, well, it was Air Canada. It was from.
Oh, you did fly Air Canada. You poor bastard.
Yeah. I paid 150 New Zealand dollars to check my bag in. They dropped an $80 US dollar.
What was the meal like on the plane?
I didn't need it. You had to pay for it. I was like, nah, stuff.
Oh, the guy.
I'll just push through. The second flight, to be fair, there was a lovely flight attendant, and I said I didn't want any food because I thought I had to pay for it. She said it's free, and I was like, okay. and I wasn't that hungry because I'd packed up before, assuming I was going to have to pay for it. And she was very nice, so I have to give her credit. She saved the day a little bit for Air Canada there, but
bloody hell.
Overall, I'd say that was the one silver lining within a pretty dark cloud of an experience.
This is the first world problems.
Yeah, good problems to have, Steve.
But I had the worst international flight I've ever had with them from Toronto to Amsterdam. I paid for premium economy, which I thought would be more comfortable.
Yeah.
Well, it was barely more comfortable than economy, that's true.
Yeah.
But the food they served was food that if I'd got it in economy, I would have said, this is the sort of shit they serve to save money. This is in premium economy. When we came in for breakfast here, breakfast consisted of a small can of yogurt. I think there may have been some fruit, but I'm not sure. And a cake about that big, and that was breakfast.
Yummy.
And the food was pathetic. No, Air Canada, never again.
Never again. That's okay. That's all right. Wow. But like you said, good problems to have.
Good problems to have.
I grew up on in a very small town, and one of my first jobs was milking cows, right?
Moving cows.
Milking cows.
Milking cows. Yeah. You actually milk cows.
I did.
Physical like that. Well, not putting a device onto them.
We had the device on it, but
so put it under the tits. And
we had cups. Yeah, not that small the town. So, but anyway, the guy I used to work for, John Barrow, absolute legend. John Barrow.
Okay.
Yeah, he's a champion. And every morning on the first row of cows, you do the first side first, and then once the first side's done, it sort of swings back and forth while the cows come in, but you kind of have to wait for a bit on the first row. And without fail, every morning he'd be standing there at the end of the line and go, Seamus. You go, yeah. You go, too much milk, mate.
Too much milk?
Too much milk. And I said, yeah, John. He'd go, good problems to have. Yeah, so whenever somebody's got good problems, I say, you got too much milk, mate.
That's one I haven't heard before.
Yeah. Well, you can keep that.
Yeah. Well, we got a lot of fun.
A lot of fun. Great conversation.
Yeah.
I really appreciate you taking the time to have me
appreciate
over.
it. This is actually a bit of a background here as well.
Yeah.
So you've joined my online course with school.
Yes, and for the purpose of I saw you on Lex Friedman, and I listened to that while I was painting a house, and I had zero economic experience in terms of my knowledge, but I, as a general person, I believe that if you're going to try to understand a system, you should at least take into account all components and not just certain aspects that for whatever reason fit the narrative that you're trying to push. And based on what you said and how it affected and was so directly correlated with global warming, I couldn't help. It piqued my interest so much, and I just followed you on Twitter, and then downloaded the Funny Money book and started chatting with sorry, what's your assistant's name?
Nicole.
Started chatting with Nicole, and then she asked me what I was doing there. I said, I'm intrigued about all this because in terms of my conversation that I'm doing with my podcast, the least I can do is get informed about the systems that are in place. And you were the first person that excited me about economics, and it made it sound like there was an aspect of it that people weren't considering. You were taking into account all components, and it sounded like a much more well-rounded version of it than the YouTube videos and stuff that I watched, which basically just said that the central bank prints money and mucks around with interest rates, and that's the end of it, and there's no real way of predicting when things will happen. And it just didn't, those two versions of it, it was so clear to me that you had a better understanding of, or at least were attempting to create a better model of how things do operate. And from that, ended up joining Rebel Economics, which is a fantastic community to be a part of.
Isn't it?
People in there are amazing, and the conversations, the lectures, and the way that you flow with the lectures too. It's not so rigid, you're like, well, if you have a question, just ask as we go, and you're very willing to sort of bend and chat, and then too, just with the classroom feature and being able to watch videos and sort of get a nice.
How does that work? Because I don't actually see that side of the show.
You've got 7 weeks that's all split up, and each week has a subset of categories, and then they're all put into videos. And then, and so it's
because I record the videos, obviously.
Yeah. And so I just watch video after video, and it's just
how many do you reckon you've watched so far?
They build off each other. Well, I've done what I would consider to be the entire foundation of it, which is just sort of that big bulk of that first week, and I admit I should have done more. But the reason I didn't is because I had the first week, did that, and then I've been overseas for the last 3 weeks traveling in South America and doing all of that. And I was like, you know, the balance of the two is very difficult when you're trying to catch up with people, and then also, oh, give me a minute, I'm just going to go spend an hour and watch some videos in a room.
You're actually watching it while you've been traveling from New Zealand through South America to bloody Toronto. So
I'd do it when I could, and you know, I didn't always have internet and stuff, so it's sort of like I'm at people's houses and I get to the end of a big day of going out and stuff, and then I'd sit down and just watch a video and let it go. But so you just sort of watch through all the videos and then you tick them off, and then at the end there's the exam, which I haven't got to yet. But it's really good. It's easy to pick up, and I'm enjoying the experience of being in it. And then I just thought, well, I'm coming over, so
why not drop in?
I flicked a message, and I thought you'd be, you know, doing X, Y, Z or whatever.
Oh, look, I've got a lot of stuff to get done, but I do completely appreciate that group, because it came out of the commercial approach from Jordan to start running the courses, and you know, I was cynical about it when I first got in there, but the idea that you make money by giving lectures, well, that's what I do. And then the community that's grown up around it, it's amazing. It's just a fabulous bunch of people. Like you see Alvin's recent posts.
No, I didn't actually.
He's written some, I've actually forgotten the precise details, but he's giving a sort of philosophical interpretation of money in a capitalist economy.
Right.
Beautifully done. And you've got, he's an outstanding intellect. You've got the guy on the west coast of America who is developing the idea of carbon capture using phytoplankton.
I would have to spend some time looking into that. I heard him talking about it on a lecture, and I was like, whoa,
I know.
There's a lot going on
here. So
it
isn't just me. I mean, there's a very rich community of people, and I love the conversations that are taking part. And the class itself, it feels like, as well as me getting a chance to put my intellectual ideas forward, it feels like I'm in, walk into a, it's the Dunbar number. Walk a community of people you thoroughly enjoy, you learn the whole thing. It's a pity when the class has to finish, but 2 hours disappears pretty rapidly. So there's been it's total serendipity that it happened, and I'm completely delighted that it has happened. And as well as helping me to communicate my ideas, I'm learning a lot from the community as well. So it's a great feeling.
Brilliant. Yeah, and it's like it's the same for me in terms of like having the conversation. You're passing along ideas while people are interpreting it and growing their own based on a foundation of that mutual understanding of change is the only constant, and your truth has to apply to that theory. You know, you've got to make sure that you're open-minded and you're willing to hear what other people have to say, and also be willing to be challenged. You know, it's like, well, what about this? And it's like, okay, fair point. All right, let's see what that means. And it's like, it's a great community. I'm very glad to be a part of it. So, thank you.
Okay, let's go get some lunch.
Yeah, sounds good. Sounds good.
I'm getting hungry. Okay, Jordan, hope you can use that stuff.